Bahia, Bahia, so lovely is your name. Bahia, Bahia, we've all been touched by your flame. Because of you, the Latin world knows Baha'u'llah, the first to gather night and cry, Allahu. Your sacrifice and tears have cleansed your people's fears. Bahia, Baha'u'llah's here.
Bahia, Bahia, so lovely is your name. Bahia, Bahia, we've all been touched by your flame. Because of you, the Latin world knows Baha'u'llah, the first to gather night and cry, Allahu Akbar. Your sacrifice and tears have cleansed your people's fears. Bahia, Baha'u'llah's here.
Ooh, when I think of your embrace, every smile on every face, my soul smiles,
Smile, smile.
Bahia, Bahia, so lovely is your name.
Bahia, Bahia, we've all been touched by your flame. Bahia, Bahia,
So lovely is your name.
Bahia, Bahia,
My soul smiles.
O loved ones of Abdu'l-Baha, man's life has its springtime and is endowed with marvelous glory. The period of youth is characterized by strength and vigor and stands out as the choicest time in human life. Therefore you should strive day and night so that endowed with heavenly strength inspired with brilliant motives, and aided by his celestial power and heavenly grace and confirmation, you may become the ornaments of the world of humanity and preeminent amongst those who are initiated into true learning and the love of God. You must be distinguished amidst men by your sanctity and detachment, loftiness of purpose, magnanimity, determination, noble-mindedness, tenacity, the elevation of your aims, and your spiritual qualities, that you may become the means of exaltation and glory for the cause of God and the dawning places of his heavenly bestowals, that you may conduct yourselves in conformity with the counsels and exhortations of the Blessed Beauty. May my life be offered up for his loved ones, and by reflecting Baha'i qualities and attributes, you may stand out distinguished from others. Abdu'l-Baha eagerly anticipates that each one of you may become even as a fearless lion, moving in the pastures of human perfection, and a musk-laden breeze wafting over the meads of virtue. The glory of glories rest upon you. Abdu'l-Baha.
What beautiful devotions. Hello and welcome again to the Sunday morning program. Just a reminder to those that are dialing in, this program is being recorded. For the dear friends who have participated in our programs in the past, and for those for whom this is your first time, we thank you for attending and encourage you to fully participate in the Q&A and discussion section of today's program, so that we can all have a truly rich learning experience. Today's theme is the continuation of a series of presentations, and in commemoration of this historically significant and blessed centenary year in honor of the ascension of Abdu'l-Baha. This program is three most consequential women in Abdu'l-Baha's life, as presented by Mrs. Baharieh Rouhani Ma'ani. I'd like to invite dear Ismail Abura to give us an introduction to Mrs. Ma'ani.
Thank you, dear foreigners. Dear friends, welcome to the Baha'i Sunday morning program. As foreigners said, we have a wonderful speaker, Baharieh Rouhani Mahani. Baharieh Rouhani is from the lineage of early responders to the cause of the Bab and Baha'u'llah in Nairis. She was born and raised in Shiraz, studied Persian literature at the University of Shiraz, before settling in Kenya as a Baha'i pioneer in December 1960. In December 1971, She was invited to serve on the staff of the Baha'i World Center, which lasted about 38 years. She relocated to Washington, D.C. in August 2009. She's a researcher, a translator, and author. Mrs. Rouhani has published books in English. The latest is Leaves of the Twin Divine Trees, an in-depth study of the lives of women closely related to the Bab and Baha'u'llah. She has also published numerous articles in English and Farsi on the status of women in religion and other topics. Dear friends, we are very delighted to welcome Mrs. Baharieh Rouhani. Please welcome.
Thank you very much, Ismail, for this gracious introduction. It gives me a great pleasure to continue the series of talks on the most consequential women in the life of Abdu'l-Baha. How befitting that we should be talking about those women who meant so much to Abdu'l-Baha. The three are his mother, Asiya Khanum, his sister, Baharieh Khanum. The third is Monira Khanum, his wife. Last week, the presentation was about Abdu'l-Baha's mother, Asiya Khanum. This week is about Baharieh Khanum, Abdu'l-Baha's beloved sister. I greet all who are here today participating in this second session of the series. Since last week, the focus was on the life of Asiya Khanum and her sufferings and the sacrifices that she made, which included also her daughter, Baharieh Khanum. This week, I will try to focus on Baharieh Khanum's station, then we'll succinctly list the major events of her life. And what is really the purpose of this session, in my mind, is to focus on the significance of her resting place on Mount Carmel. Baharieh Khanum is the eldest daughter of Baha'u'llah and Asiya Khanum. She was named Fatemeh at birth. Later, Baha'u'llah gave her the name Baharieh, which is really the feminine form of Baha'i. The early years of the greatest Holy Leaf's life witnessed Baha'u'llah's deep involvement with the spread of the cause of the Bab. Baharieh Khanum was born in 1846, 2 years after the Bab's declaration. She was 2 years younger than Abdu'l-Baha. She shared all of Baha'u'llah's sufferings and trials from childhood. And
I'm sorry to cut you. Would you like me to share the slides now?
no, I will mention when.
I'm so sorry. Thank you.
No, it's okay. I noticed. It's fine. Her long distinguished life was devoted to serving the cause of her illustrious father, assisting her saintly mother, supporting her incomparable brother, Abdu'l-Baha, and also serving the cause of Baha'u'llah and all the believers. Now, focusing on her station, I will start with what Baha'u'llah has said, and we will go to the next slide. Baha'u'llah's testimony for Baharieh Khanum. Okay. Baha'u'llah's addressing Baharieh Khanum says, "This is my testimony for her who hath heard my voice and drawn nigh unto me. Verily, she is a leaf that hath sprung from this pre-existent root. She hath revealed herself in my name." This is the reason Baha'u'llah gave her the name Baha'iyeh, because she revealed herself in his name and tasted, he says, of the sweet savors of my holy, my wondrous pleasure. At one time, we gave her to drink from my honeyed mouth. At another, caused her to partake of my mighty, my luminous Kauthar. Upon her rests the glory of my name and the fragrance of my shining robe. He again says, how high is the testimony of the Sadratul Muntaha for its leaf? How exalted the witness of the tree of life and to its fruit. Through my remembrance of her, a fragrance laden with the perfume of musk hath been diffused. Well is it with him that hath inhaled it and exclaimed, all praise be to thee, O God, my Lord, the most glorious. How sweet thy presence before me. How sweet to gaze upon thy face, to bestow upon thee my loving kindness, to favor thee with my tender care, to make mention of thee in this my tablet, a tablet which I have ordained as a token of my hidden and manifest grace unto thee. These tender expressions of Baha'u'llah for his daughter bring to mind the intense connection that the greatest holy leaf had with her father. How sweet thy presence before me, he says. How sweet to gaze upon thy face, to bestow upon thee my loving kindness, to favor thee with my tender care, to make mention of thee in this my tablet, a tablet which I have ordained as a token of my hidden and manifest grace unto thee. Please note the highlighting is mine, just to bring it out the way that Baha'u'llah expresses his feelings for his daughter. Next, please. Baharieh Khanum's unique station. As we all know, she has been introduced as the most outstanding women heroine of the Baha'i dispensation. And this is Baha'u'llah's tablet referring to that. Addressing his eldest daughter, Baha'u'llah says, "Let these exalted words be thy love song on the tree of Baha. O thou most holy and resplendent leaf, God besides whom is none other God, the Lord of this world and the next. Verily, we have elevated thee to the rank of one of the most distinguished among thy sex, and granted thee in my court a station such as none other woman had surpassed. Thus have we preferred thee and raised thee above the rest as a sign of grace from him who is the Lord of the throne on high and earth below." Next, please. And here is what how Shoghi Effendi describes Baharieh Khanum's ordeals and sufferings. The reason Baha'u'llah has made her the most outstanding heroine of this dispensation is because she suffered so much and sacrificed so much. These acknowledgements don't come without a rich background to the whole introduction. Shoghi Effendi says, from early childhood, she had her share of the sufferings of Baha'u'llah, subjected even as he was to hardships and calamities. And she was as well the partner in sorrows and tribulations of Abdu'l-Baha. So her whole life was spent in suffering in silence and in serving without expecting any praise, glorification, because she just enjoyed being of service. As a result, she was endowed with so much grace and so much bounty from Baha'u'llah. Next, please. I was struck by the way Shoghi Effendi explains in his writings the share that Baharieh Khanum had in influencing the course of some of the chief events in the annals of the faith. Extolling her in one of his tributes, Shoghi Effendi says, "Only future generations and pens abler than mine can and will pay a worthy tribute to the towering grandeur of her spiritual life, to the unique part she played through the tumultuous stages of Baha'i history, to the expressions of unqualified praise that have streamed from the pen of both Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, the center of his covenant, though unrecorded and in the main unsuspected by the mass of her passionate admirers in East and West." Then he says, the share she had in influencing the course of some of the chief events in the annals of the faith, the sufferings she bore the sacrifices she made, the rare gifts of unfailing sympathy she so strikingly displayed. These and many others stand so inextricably interwoven with the fabric of the cause itself that no future historian of the faith of Baha'u'llah can afford to ignore or minimize. I have pondered many a times on this statement from Shoghi Effendi, also focused on his warning to historians that they should not ignore or minimize what the greatest holy leaf, Baharieh Rouhani, has done for what we have. The best person to acknowledge that kind of debt we have to the greatest holy leaf is no other than Shoghi Effendi, one of the twin successors of Abdu'l-Baha, the one who was so much loved by the greatest holy leaf and assisted most sincerely after Abdu'l-Baha passed away, assisted her great nephew in whatever way she could. And Shoghi Effendi was a witness to the way so selflessly the greatest holy leaf served the Baha'i cause. I will now just briefly touch upon the major events of the greatest holy leaf's life before showing you slides about her resting place and its significance. Baharieh Rouhani was 6 years old when Baha'u'llah was arrested and imprisoned in the Siyah-Char. What she went through together with her mother and her two brothers, Abdu'l-Baha and the Purest Branch, we covered in detail during the last session. As a result of that event, which left a lasting, indelible trace on her heart and mind, she remembered to the end of her life those few months of horror and how her mother suffered to provide for the family. The next one was the exile from Tehran to Baghdad during severe winter months. And Baha'u'llah was so ill that he had to be tended to while he was traveling, and how her pregnant mother had to take care while she herself needed so much care. She had to take care of others. During the Baghdad period, the greatest holy leaf as a little girl had many hard duties to perform, especially when Baha'u'llah had gone to the mountains of Sulaymaniyah in Kurdistan. That sojourn lasted for 2 years. She says one of the things that she did every day was drawing water from a deep well in the house. The ropes, she says, were hard and rough, and the bucket was heavy. My dear mother used to help, but she was not very strong. and my arms were rather weak. She's talking about the period when Baha'u'llah was away, when Mirza Yahya was living in their house as an uninvited guest. And she says during all that time when she was working so hard together with her mother, their guest never helped. Those who haven't lived in Iran and are not familiar with how water was drawn from well for the days, cooking and all the things that needed water, know what an arduous task it was to draw water from a well. And the greatest holy leaf then was only maybe 7, 8 years old. And she had to go through this several hours a day. I'm using this just as an example. Then when Baha'u'llah returned from his 2-year sojourn in Kurdistan, how happy she was that she had her father living with them again. Speaking of how her mother tutored her brother, that's Abdu'l-Baha, when he was young, when responding to a question from Lady Bloomfield about how she received any lesson, she says, but she never had time to receive tuition. She was completely selfless and never thought of herself. She was surprised that the interviewer had asked her such a question after she had said that her mother and Mirza Musa gave lessons to Abdu'l-Baha. When it came to her, she said, but I never had any time for that. Then the next stage was going to Istanbul to Constantinople. The journey from Baghdad to Constantinople took about 110 days. And then 4 months in Constantinople. Then they were exiled to Adrianople, where they stayed for 5 years. The events in Adrianople were magnified and came to a head because of the behavior of Mirza Yahya Azan, who poisoned Baha'u'llah by inviting him and smearing some poison in his teacup. And Baha'u'llah became ill, very ill, for a whole month. He suffered. And then Mirza Yahya even tried to have someone kill Baha'u'llah while he was in the bath. So all of that made things so bad that Baha'u'llah had to separate himself from the rest, took his family, went to another house, and for quite a while did not contact anyone. During that time, Mirza Yahya had the ground all to himself and did whatever he could to undermine Baha'u'llah and his station, until Baha'u'llah sent him an invitation with explanation about his station and asked Mirza Yahya to respond to that. Mirza Yahya asked that they go to a certain mosque and argue and see who will win. Baha'u'llah accepted, but Mirza Yahya did not appear on the day that he had appointed for that trial. Then Baha'u'llah sent him a kind of ultimatum that he should respond to the claim of Baha'u'llah of being the promised one, the one that the Bab had sacrificed his life for, and the one whom God shall make manifest. Mirza Yahya made a counterclaim, and as a result of that, he created a lot of confusion. He went to Istanbul and complained about Baha'u'llah and prepared the ground for the authorities to use as an excuse to exile Baha'u'llah to the Holy Land, to Akka, to the citadel city. These I mentioned because I like to highlight what the greatest holy leaf throughout that period was going through. The journey to Akka has its own story, how hard it was. The arrival in Akka, when they met with a very hostile population who had been told that the god of the Persians was being imprisoned in Akka. They had come out and with their threatening words, they greeted the prisoners. Baharieh Rouhani explains how they arrived in the army barracks in Akka. He says, we were taken to the old fortress of Akka, where we were crowded together. There was no air, a small quantity of very bad coarse bread was provided. We were unable to get fresh water to drink. Our sufferings were not diminished. Then an epidemic of typhoid broke out. Nearly all became ill. We know that during the incarceration in that fortress, her beloved brother Mirza Mehdi sacrificed his life before the eyes of his parents. And the greatest holy leaf was a witness to all of that. The only happy things that happened in Akka was the marriage of Abdu'l-Baha, which will be discussed during the next session when we talk about Munira Khanum. Then the Baharieh Khanum's mother passed away. We know the details because of the last session and things that have been recorded. After the passing of her mother, the greatest holy leaf went through the agony of losing her father, whose ascension took place in 1892. She witnessed the intrigues played by the covenant breakers. And during all that time, she stood firmly behind Abdu'l-Baha. After some years in Akka, Abdu'l-Baha had a house built on Mount Carmel. They moved to Haifa. About that time, the remains of the Bab, which had been transported to the Holy Land and were kept there for some 10 years, they were interred in the shrine that Abdu'l-Baha had built, the original 6 rooms. I have not been able to find information whether the greatest holy leaf and the women members of the family were present during that celebration, because women could not mix with men. But surely they were somewhere that they could hear and see, but could not actually be seen and heard. We will go to the next slide. This shows the Greatest Holy Leaf in her older years. And the next one is serving as Abdu'l-Baha's vicegerent. The next one, yes. We know that Abdu'l-Baha, after he interred the remains of the Bab in the permanent mausoleum that he had built for that purpose, took a trip to the West, which lasted about 3 years. Actually, he went to Egypt first, stayed there for about 10 months, and then went to Europe and returned to Egypt, and then took a trip to the United States, followed by a trip to the European continent, and returned after 3 years. So when Abdu'l-Baha was about to embark on that epoch-making trip to Egypt and the Western Hemisphere in 1910, he revealed a tablet in honor of Baharieh Rouhani. He says, "O thou, my sister, my dear sister, divine wisdom had decreed this temporary separation, but I long more and more to be with thee again. Patience is called for, and long suffering, and trust in God, and the seeking of his favor. Since thou art there, my mind is completely at rest." This tablet shows that had it not been for the Greatest Holy Leaf, who really held the fort during Abdu'l-Baha's absence, it would have been far, far more difficult for Abdu'l-Baha to leave the Holy Land and be away for such a long time. This was the beginning of introducing the Greatest Holy Leaf to the Baha'i world as a person capable of being Abdu'l-Baha's vicegerent. Now we see what Shoghi Effendi says about what the Greatest Holy Leaf did during Abdu'l-Baha's absence. Next slide, please. He says, "And when the ban on Abdu'l-Baha's confinement was lifted, he, with unhesitating confidence, invested his trusted and honored sister with the responsibility of attending to the multitudinous details arising out of his protracted absence from the Holy Land." He also says, at the time of his, that's Abdu'l-Baha's absence in the Western world, she was his competent deputy, his representative, and vicegerent, with none to equal her. There were many wisdoms in the trip that Abdu'l-Baha took to the West. Of course, the most outstanding reason and purpose was to spread abroad the fragrances of Baha'u'llah's message. In my mind, and probably in many other minds, one of the wisdoms was an opportunity to introduce the Greatest Holy Leaf to the Baha'i world, because Abdu'l-Baha had no sons, and people did not generally know, especially in Iran, about Shoghi Effendi until Abdu'l-Baha passed away. And then his will and testament introduced Shoghi Effendi to the world. And there was a time gap between the time Abdu'l-Baha passed away and the time Shoghi Effendi reached the Holy Land, because he was studying in England. It was a whole month, a very crucial month in the history of the faith, because of what the covenant breakers were waiting for to do after Abdu'l-Baha's ascension. So this trip to the West provided an excellent opportunity for the Baha'i world to learn more about the greatest holy leaf. Shoghi Effendi also says at the time, okay, I read that. Now we go to Abdu'l-Baha's ascension and what happened next. It would be the next slide. Okay, I don't have a slide for that, sorry, but we keep the slide here and see, read it when it comes to it. I did not go into the ascension of Abdu'l-Baha and the details of it, except that there was a month before Shoghi Effendi arrived. And during that time, Mirza Muhammad Ali, the greater branch, who had been named a successor after Abdu'l-Baha, Baha'u'llah, in his Kitab-e-Ahdi, the book of his covenant, he appointed Abdu'l-Baha as his successor, the greatest branch, and he says after him will be the greater branch, which is Mirza Muhammad Ali. However, Mirza Muhammad Ali, during Abdu'l-Baha's time, refused to accept his authority as being the only successor of Baha'u'llah. Mirza Muhammad Ali wanted to be on par with Abdu'l-Baha. And as a result, he broke the covenant of Baha'u'llah, something that he had tried even during Baha'u'llah's time by writing certain things, sending to the believers in Iran as verses from God. Baha'u'llah was very angry with him and said that if he moves away from the shadow of the tree of cause, even for one moment, he will be brought to naught. So by opposing Abdu'l-Baha during his lifetime, he lost the legacy that Baha'u'llah has left in his book of the covenant for him. And therefore, Abdu'l-Baha made his own will and testament in which he introduced Shoghi Effendi as the one who would be the guardian of the cause of God. When Abdu'l-Baha passed away, Mirza Muhammad Ali and his supporters, who were a few in the Holy Land, found the opportunity, especially that Shoghi Effendi was away, to renew the subject and placing Muhammad Ali as the one who is after Abdu'l-Baha. And it took some time before the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha could be sent to the Baha'is in the East and the West. And also, one of the things that the covenant breakers did during the time when Shoghi Effendi was in charge was stealing the key to the shrine of Baha'u'llah from its Baha'i caretaker. And there was a court case because it had to be settled. The intention of the covenant breakers was to make it possible to go to the court and muddy the waters and show the kitab, the book of the covenant, and introduce Muhammad Ali as Abdu'l-Baha's successor. However, the court refused. At that time, it was during the British mandate in Palestine. And they refused to deal with it. And they said it is a religious matter and we don't deal with it. It has to go to the religious court. And the religious court realized it had no jurisdiction over the affairs of the Baha'i faith because it was a Muslim court. In any case, it took a while, but in the end, the keys were returned to the guardian, and so much expired after that also Shoghi Effendi, after he returned to the Holy Land, after a short while, he had to take off to spend some time meditating and also focusing on the responsibilities that had been put on his shoulders. At that time, Shoghi Effendi appointed the Greatest Holy Leaf as the head of a committee that he set up to deal with all the affairs of the Baha'i world. So you see, Shoghi Effendi is following in the footsteps of Abdu'l-Baha after he introduced the Greatest Holy Leaf as the person in charge during his absence in the West. And it works very well with the Greatest Holy Leaf being the head of that committee. This is all recorded in historical records, and especially the leaves of the twin divine trees goes into great detail about this time and what the Greatest Holy Leaf did. Okay, let's go now to the passing of Baharieh Khanum and the tribute of Shoghi Effendi to the Greatest Holy Leaf, which further introduces her to the Baha'i world. She passed away in the early morning hours of 15 July 1932. Shoghi Effendi sent the following message to the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States of Canada. It says, Greatest Holy Leaf's immortal spirit winged its flight great beyond. Countless lovers her saintly life, east and west, in east and west, seized with pangs of anguish, plunged in unutterable sorrow. Humanity shall ere long recognize irreparable loss. Our beloved faith well nigh crushed by devastating blow of Abdu'l-Baha's unexpected ascension, now laments passing last remnant of Baha'u'llah, its most exalted member. Holy Family cruelly divested its most precious, most great adorning. I, for my part, bewail sudden removal, my sole earthly sustainer, the joy and solace of my life. Her sacred remains will repose vicinity holy shrines. So grievous a bereavement necessitates suspension for 9 months throughout Baha'i world, every manner religious festivity. Inform local assemblies and groups, hold befitting manner memorial gatherings, extol a life so laden, sacred experiences, so rich, imperishable memoirs, advise holding additional commemoration service of strictly devotional character, auditorium Mashriq al-Asghar. Because it was sent as a cable, you will see lots of words connecting the phrases are missing, because those who are old enough remember the days when communication, urgent communication, was done by cable, and it had its own language that people observed in order to avoid extra cost. So we'll see next how Shoghi Effendi created the beginnings of the ark by putting the remains, by burying the greatest holy leaf on a certain spot in the vicinity of the shrine. Before I go to that, Shoghi Effendi also sent a message in Persian to Iran to inform the believers in the East. And this is, I don't seem to have a message to the friends in Iran. Okay, I don't have the actual message, but it's the same sentiment, the same description, but shorter. And you can find that message, the translation of that message, in Leaves of the Twin Divine Trees. Shoghi Effendi, unfortunately, was not in the Holy Land when Baharieh Khanum passed away. And this made him very, very sad. However, he had anticipated that she may pass away during the time that he was away. He had left instructions with the believers that if she passed away during his absence, where she was to be buried. And sure enough, it happened during his absence. During summer, Shoghi Effendi dealt with the things that he had to do, especially that the heat in Haifa, in the Holy Land, was very extreme, and there was no pilgrimage, and he could attend to other things. So anyway, it was one of those times. So the believers who had detailed instruction as to where to bury the greatest holy leaf did it in his absence. And that is the next slide that shows where the greatest holy leaf was buried. Guided by the contents of the Tablet of Carmel, Charter of the Development of the Baha'i World Center, Shoghi Effendi envisaged an ark in the vicinity of the Shrine of the Baha, round which the international institutions of the faith were to be built. The initial step he took for creating the ark was burying the body of Baharieh Khanum, whereto he could also transfer the remains of her saintly mother and martyred brother to form the focal center of that ark. The spot that he chose was in the vicinity of the Shrine of the Baha, on land that already the faith owned. And the next slide will show the location. Okay, you will see this part of Mount Carmel, actually probably the whole of this side of Mount Carmel. There was no development above the Shrine of the Baha. By creating the monument of the greatest holy leaf in this spot, he had a whole plan for the rest of the top, this part of Mount Carmel. Now, the building that is to the left of the monument of the greatest holy leaf, you see this was also built by Baha'is, and it was meant to be a school for girls, a project initiated by Monireh Khanum, which will be covered in the next session. Shoghi Effendi placed the monument of the greatest holy leaf here, but then brought the remains of Asiya Khanum and Mirza Mehdi, who had been buried in different cemeteries in Akka, transferred their remains to the vicinity, to the neighborhood of the monument of the greatest holy leaf, and buried them. The next slide, I think, will show the twin monuments. Okay, this is also the greatest holy leaf. Next, please. These are the twin monuments of Asiya Khanum and Mirza Mehdi. Baharieh Khanum had always expressed the wish to be buried next to her mother and her brother. Instead of burying the greatest holy leaf in Akka next to her mother, Shoghi Effendi had a plan. He brought the remains of Asiya Khanum and Mirza Mehdi and buried them in the neighborhood of the monument of the greatest holy leaf. Then developed the monument's garden, which is exquisite. And for a long time, that was the only development on this side of Mount Carmel. By making this the base of the ark and the focal center of the international institutions of the faith, he created an ark. And next slide. When Shoghi Effendi transferred the remains of Asiya Khanum and Mirza Mehdi to the neighborhood of the monument of the greatest holy leaf, he sent this message to the Baha'i world. It says messages to America because through America, the Western world got the message. He says the conjunction of the resting place of the greatest holy leaf with those of her brother and mother incalculably reinforces the spiritual potencies of that consecrated spot, which under the wings of the Bab's overshadowing sepulchre and in the vicinity of the future Mashriq al-Askar, which will be reared on its flank, is destined to evolve into the focal center of those administrative institutions ordained by Baha'u'llah and anticipated by Abdu'l-Baha, and which are to function in consonance with the principles that govern the twin institutions of the guardianship and the universal house of justice. Then and then only will this momentous prophecy, which illuminates the concluding passages of the tablet of Carmel, be fulfilled. Ere long will God sail his ark upon thee, that's Carmel, and will manifest the people of Baha who have been mentioned in the book of names. Next slide. Next, and the next one. Okay, when the Monireh Khanum passed away, Shoghi Effendi buried Monireh Khanum also in the neighborhood of the other 3 monuments and sent this message. He says, blessed remains purest branch and master's mother, safely transferred hallowed precincts, shrines, Mount Carmel, long inflicted humiliation wiped away, machinations, covenant breakers, frustrate plan defeated, cherished wish, greatest holy leaf fulfilled, sister, brother, mother, wife Abdu'l-Baha of Abdu'l-Baha, reunited one spot, designed, constitute focal center, Baha'i administrative institutions at faith's world center, share joyful news, entire body American believers. Monira Khanum passed away about the same time that the remains of Asiya Khanum and Mirza Mehdi had been transferred to Haifa, to Mount Carmel. So you will see these 4 members of Abdu'l-Baha's family, 3 of whom are women that we are focusing on, are covered in this message of Shoghi Effendi. Of course, we will talk about Monira Khanum next time, but today let's go to the next slide and see. That's what Shoghi Effendi envisaged to create. The ark, I don't know if I can show you by putting my cursor. This is where the monument of the greatest holy leaf is. And then here are the twin monuments of Mirza Mehdi and Asiya Khanum. And down here is the monument of Monira Khanum. The monument of Monira Khanum is smaller in size, has less columns, and has no dome, which shows her station is far below the greatest holy leaf and Abdu'l-Baha's mother and brother. Nevertheless, one of the 3 consequential women in Abdu'l-Baha's life. Okay, this is the base of the ark. The focal center of the ark is here. And then here we have the ark. 4 of the 5 institutions on the ark have been built already. The Universal House of Justice occupies the top center. And Shoghi Effendi shared the prophecy about this institution together with his, which of course we have no more guardian, though we have the institution of guardianship. But the House of Justice occupied the center top of the ark. And this, before I end, I like to make an observation about the link between the ark, A-R-K, which means ship, and ark, A-R-C, which is a semicircle or a rainbow shape. This brings to mind the story, the account of Noah and the ship that he built, the ark that he built, because a devastating flood that occurred due to people's rebelliousness. And they made Noah pray to God that something will happen that will wipe out this disobedient, rebellious population. And as a result of that flood, many drowned except for those who entered the ark, and they were saved. At that time, after the flood subsided, a rainbow appeared. And that rainbow, is in the shape of a semicircle. Also, it brings to mind what Shoghi Effendi says about this institution of the Universal House of Justice, which the next slide will show sits. There we have the Universal House of Justice that Shoghi Effendi says is the last refuge for a tottering civilization. How impressive that this old prophecy has come to be manifestly represented by this institution at the top of this arc. The first step for its creation was taken by Shoghi Effendi when the greatest holy leaf passed away. And the first step was taken by placing her in a spot that would become the focal center of the international institutions, administrative institutions of the faith. With this, I will end this presentation. Thank you for your attention. And we'll see if there are any questions. Oh yes, this is important, the acknowledgement. Thank you, Pema.
Thank you, dear Baharieh June. This has been such a beautiful, insightful presentation. What you've studied about the life, the character, the services of the greatest holy leaf, her role in the faith, in the cause of Baha'u'llah, in the life of Abdu'l-Baha, in the life of Shoghi Effendi. Really, there's such a beautiful way to explain. There were so many points that I couldn't remember having read. I don't know about the rest of you all here on the call. If at this time anyone has any questions, first we'd like to remind you to share your video so that we could have a feeling of a more intimate conversation. And also, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you can either raise your hand in the participant window or type your question in the chat. To raise your hand, you just click on participants at the bottom of the screen. A window will open and you can click raise hand. Actually, I think you can also, you click reactions and then you choose raise hand. So there should be a reactions option. And if you're typing a question in the chat, please begin your question with a question mark so it helps us to know. If you would like to address your question privately, you can do so to Ismail, Obura, or myself, and we'll share your question without sharing who asked it or your comment. Now, we want this to be as much a conversation as a Q&A. So if you would like, you can respond to each other's questions and comments as well. So let's take the first question. If no one has one, I have one. So a little bit earlier, you mentioned the committee that Abdu'l-Baha had appointed Baharieh Rouhani to. I don't know if I heard correctly.
It was Shoghi Effendi who formed the committee.
Could you explain a little bit more, because I think I missed that part.
Yeah. When Shoghi Effendi decided to take some time off, he appointed a committee and put Baharieh Khanum in charge of that committee as the convener and as the head of that committee. Because also for attending to some legal matters, they needed to, the guardian needed to introduce the committee to the authorities in case anything came up to deal with. So Baharieh Khanum was in effect the person that was in charge, and there are actually records of the way she communicated with the authorities and the responses, because the key to the shrine of Baha'u'llah that had been by force taken from its Baha'i custodian was returned actually to the Baha'i World Center during the guardian's absence. And there is correspondence between Baharieh Khanum and the authorities regarding that matter. So they had a legal standing as far as the government was concerned.
Thank you so much. I believe Payman Akavan has a question. Go ahead, Payman.
Thank you. Thank you again for such a wonderful presentation. One thing that you had in your slides and you mentioned was that the Guardian suspended all activities for 9 months after her passing in commemoration of her passing. That was very interesting. And if you can maybe mention, I don't know how advanced the administration was, and but maybe you can talk to that. That was an interesting point.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was probably that was the first time and maybe the only time that such a request was made by the Guardian. He said all festivities should be suspended. Everything went on as it was, but he was so heartbroken. When the greatest holy leaf, he says that he lost, his only earthly sustainer, using that kind of language. And it's a reflection of how it affected him. And he wanted the Baha'i world to share in the sorrow of the occasion. And so festivities were suspended, but activities continued to go on.
What are some examples of the festivities that were occurring?
Yeah. When there are Baha'i holidays, sometime in Iran, I grew up in Iran, and people really celebrated. When there was a happy holiday, they celebrated, they decorated, they brought out their silk materials, brocades, and they put them up on the wall. Anybody who was going back knew there was something extremely happy and festive was going on. In the West, we don't do that thing, we have just a meeting with music maybe. But so I don't know exactly what was in his mind, but this is what comes to my mind when I think of festivities. As Baha'u'llah says, when someone passes away, he said, adopt a way in between being happy and don't scream and shout and lament, but don't also be too joyous and celebrative. It's that medium state.
Thank you.
If anyone else can contribute, I would be happy to hear, but I can tell you what I know from my childhood years. Okay, the question says, do you know how many people and who were on that committee? I don't know for sure, but my guess is that Abdu'l-Baha's sons-in-law were on that committee, whether all of them or some of them. It was within the family, the male members of the family. The greatest holy leaf was the only female. It was so unusual to have a woman in a position of authority. It was completely avoided because men handled the work outside the home. So this is an absolute revolution and revelation, putting the greatest holy leaf, not only just as a member, but as the head of that committee.
Thank you, Baharieh. Amana Badipur says on the chat that thanks for another moving presentation. I just received your book and looking forward to reading it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I hope more people will read this book, because not because my name is on it, but because it introduces the sacrificial, long-suffering women who have done so much. You know, we are riding over the shoulders of those who have gone before us. History introduces mostly the male members of the community who have done so much, and they have. But it doesn't mean that women had no share. So that's what the book tries to do. But thank you.
Baharieh has a question.
Thank you so much again for a really beautiful sharing of the lives of these dear souls, Baharieh Khanum. I had a question, I had two questions. One was, forgive me, maybe you had mentioned this, but what year was the year that the committee that you're referring to that was established that dear Baharieh Khanum was a member of as the head of it? And also, you mentioned in the talk that Shawki Effendi, the Guardian, in his, I believe it was in a message that he had written, that at this time, the world is not really, it has not received or understood the value and the true gift of what we have received from the bounties and the service and the tireless efforts of Baharieh Khanum, and that future that this will be. Can you share a little insight about what that message meant and how in what way? I may be asking something that we can't answer, but I was so curious. What do you think he meant that in the future we will have greater worth for what the work and the value of what she had contributed? And how do you think, from your research and your understanding, what those words meant?
Okay, the first question, the committee was formed. Shawki Effendi returned to Haifa about the end of December 1921. 100 years ago, we are commemorating the centenary of Abdu'l-Baha's ascension this year. So it was 100 years ago that Shawki Effendi returned to the Holy Land from England. So it was early 1922 when he appointed that committee. I don't know the exact month right now. Probably it is in the book somewhere. So it was in 1922 that he went away and appointed that committee with Baharieh Khanum as the head. That is the answer to your first question. The second question, in which he says pens abler than his will, write about Baharieh Khanum. I don't think there will be anybody who can really write any better than Shawki Effendi, but anyway, he was so self-effacing. He never talked about himself. What stands out to me in that message is to tell the historians, future historians especially, don't minimize what she did for the faith. Don't, just because she was a woman. Shawki Effendi, I think in the history of religion, is the first one that not only has not ignored the contribution of an older female member of Baha'u'llah's family, but has tried so hard to really introduce her as she was. He didn't have to say that she was his sole earthly sustainer or all the other descriptions that he gives, but he did because he wanted also the other men to take lesson by acknowledging the contribution that women of their families do. Nowadays, we see more of this because of the struggle for equality. But when I was growing up, it rarely happened that a man mentioned his wife's name, for example, in a talk to say, I and my wife went pioneering or did this or that. And so with regard to Shogh Effendi, I think he set an example, a wonderful example, that we give credit where credit is due. And we don't know yet all the details, as Shogh Effendi says, of what the greatest Holy Leaf did and how she influenced, he says, some of the major events in our history. I mean, how much more could he say to bring us to the realization that this woman was not an ordinary female member of the Holy Family. She was truly, truly exceptional and outstanding. This is what comes to mind, but others, when they read, they can form their own opinion about what he really meant by that. And I would be happy to hear your views and others' views of this statement.
Thank you so much, Baharieh Rouhani. Unfortunately, we have run over time. So we do need to close the recorded section of today's program. Of course, individuals are welcome to stay on for a few minutes and ask or comment. Thank you everyone for attending. Today's recording will be shared on the Nova Baha'i Center website at nova-bahaicenter.org, where you can always find as well the Zoom link for the Sunday morning program. Join us again next week as we explore with dear Baharieh Khanum the life and significance of Munira Khanum, the wife of Abdu'l-Baha, and continue our program on the women who have been the three women who are consequential in the life of Abdu'l-Baha. With this, we will end with a closing devotion and continue our conversation afterwards. Thank you.
The photograph I see comes alive so easily and tells me of a life that was so pure. He would never turn away from anyone, and the love in his eyes is so real. He suffered all his life to show us how to be free. He could always love his enemy. And through the worst of trials, He could take the hand of a sad and lonely man and wash away his fear for a while. He could understand the secrets we defend and make it feel that living was worthwhile. Abdu'l-Baha was his name, and Abdu'l-Baha was his life. Abdu'l-Baha was his aim. His whole life was sacrifice. Abdu'l-Baha. And anytime you feel bruised at heart, remember his glorious smile. Call to mind the promise he made. I will be with you always. Abdu'l-Baha was his name, and Abdu'l-Baha was his life. Abdu'l-Baha was his aim. His whole life a sacrifice. Abdu'l-Baha. His whole life was sacrifice. Abdu'l-Baha.
Thank you so much, dear Ismail, for that beautiful devotion. Well, friends, we're going to stop recording